Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys again today. And today's subject is going to be focusing on the three outer planets. When you have a transit from either Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, and just how that whole cycle pretty much operates. First of all, before I get to talking about the transits of those three outer planets, which are really the most transforming transits that we'll pretty much have in our life, this lifetime. Those three outer planets are they're very challenging energies and planets because they challenge the structure of the ego foundation. The ego serves as something that gives us a sense of security and identity. These three outer planets are considered to be the transpersonal planets. And, for a long time, those outer planets have been spoken about as if they are so out of our consciousness, so completely removed from our consciousness, which is another reason as to why they can feel so threatening to the ego structures. But whilst I think that still remains to be the truth, I do also think that because of the evolution that's been taking place on our Earth, so collectively on our Earth and personally, individually, in terms of the time of history that we are in at the present moment, there's been a great deal, a rapid, you could say, expansion of consciousness and growth. And because of that, you might be able to say that, depending on the individual, of course, always, that perhaps the experience of these outer three planets via transit, it may be that some people can work with these energies in a far less traumatic sort of way. Maybe. It really does depend on the individual, the transit, what their soul's evolution has been about, what their path is about, where they are at any given moment when they have one of these transits, where they are in their life, within their own self, from a soul perspective, from a mental perspective, emotional perspective, and physical perspective as well. But I think what I'm trying to say is that, if we think about just how far we've come in the last 30 years even, and more, I think even in the last 20 years, the world of technology, which is all Uranus, anything to do with the technological world, computers and so forth, is all connected. That stream of consciousness that has expanded our ability to share, connect, communicate, engage, exchange instantly, is all connected to Uranus. So, I was just doing a bit of research before, and mobile phones, for instance, only came out in Australia in 1987. Before that, there was no such thing as a mobile phone. The internet in Australia started, and when I say the internet started, I'm not talking about the extent of accessibility we have to the internet now and the speed and everything we have now. This was just the very beginning. So things were called AAR net, so quite different to what we have now. It was a dial-up internet service provider. So it was used with in conjunction with your landline at home, your telephone. That wasn't Wi-Fi. Anyway, that only kicked off in 1989. Now, that's not very long ago. So, and in America, it was, States, it was in 1983. Australia's a bit behind on a number of different levels. um, anyway, the point to these stats is just to, just to remind us and to emphasize on the fact that the level of expansion in consciousness that is seen on a number of different levels and platforms, which does emerge a great deal from the technological world, has only really kicked in, 30 years ago or so. So in 30 years, the amount of expansion and growth that's taken place on the planet is quite phenomenal. The young people who are in their teens right now, that they were born into this level of advancement that we have on a technological global level. So when you're born into something, you don't know any different. You just assume that life has always been like that, but it hasn't. For those of us that are older, such as myself, and such as any of you viewers who are watching that are in your 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, know very well that, you can see the expansion and advancement of life on a number of different levels. So things have sped up a great deal. There's this sense of things moving incredibly fast because they are. And a lot of it is connected to the technological world. 30, 40 years ago, if you wanted to call somebody, they would need to be at home and you would need to be at home, and you would both need to answer the phone in your home. We were limited and restricted to only receiving or making calls while we were in our homes. Nowadays you can call anybody anytime and for free through Facebook, through Messenger. You don't even need to pay for the call. These things, never existed 30 years ago. So the world has changed in many, many different ways. And this intensity and volume of change that has happened in a fairly short period of time is affecting our physical bodies, our spiritual bodies, our mental bodies, emotional bodies, astral bodies, etheric bodies, and any other light bodies that we have, in great ways. If we can bring into this the whole understanding that many people do have of ascension, for instance. You could say the cosmic energies are ascending, which is the planet, evolving, in other words. So the Earth's energy is ascending as a result of that. The collective human beings are ascending, all in different, in different ways, to different degrees and different levels. Some people don't appear like they've really ascended at all, or expanded their consciousness at all, or woken up at all. And there are many that haven't. Indeed, that is the case. But there are many that have, and that are very, very awake. And being woken up, as it were, is connected to the energy of the planet Uranus. So it would, in terms of a person's awakening, consciously, spiritually awakening, you could say that it would very easily and typically correlate to the energy of Uranus. Now, you could say that that would have to do with Uranus in the natal birth chart, something about the individual's birth chart, and the placement of Uranus in their chart, how it's figured and what it's connected to and so forth, can describe an individuation path of the person who's rapidly waking up and evolving quite quickly in this lifetime. then, you know, on the other hand, there can be other people who have similar configurations and are still very much in the consensus state. So, you know, the potentiality is there, you could say, for every person, um, in different ways, but whether the individual unlocks that or, you know, gains access to those potentials and that energy would have very much to do with their soul's evolution, their soul's development, where each person is at this point in time in their own personal evolution. So these the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they are the transformers of consciousness. They are the transformers of our life in the most grand, you know, the most largest ways that cannot even be measured really in a lot of senses. So Uranus, you know, is the energy that seeks to liberate you, to bring more freedom into your life and to awaken you, to decondition all the old structures that basically keep you stuck in old patterns, old ways of thinking, old structures that keep you restricted and limited and so forth. It's an unpredictable energy. It can, you know, connect to shock. You know, it can really shock a person in terms of when they're having a Uranus transit. Things happen that shock people out of their comfort zone. It's not an easy energy. I think to really go through a Uranus transit where you can experience a true sense of liberation, there has to be such a willingness to go with that energy and to just allow it to do what it needs to do. Because the moment we try to control, suppress, or resist, then what happens with these outer planets is that the energy, it's kind of like the energy is so incredibly powerful that any restrictions on it will eventually just erupt. And unfortunately, the eruption of that usually comes in through crisis or accidents or things that are not necessarily pleasant. So it's really important to let go and surrender and pretty much go with the flow of these three outer planets' energy when they're transiting your birth chart in terms of you know, hitting a really personal planet in your chart, you know, doing the triple transit, which takes about a year, or hitting your ascendant or your MC or your descendant or your IC. So any of the four angles and the personal planets, Moon, Sun, Mercury, Mars, Venus. There's great changes that will take place. Now, when it comes to these three outer planets, what my observations have been is this, that Pluto seems to be the one that it is inevitable that we experience the fate of Pluto. It's very, very difficult to avoid whatever that brings up. I don't even think we can avoid what Uranus or Neptune brings up either, but Pluto seems to be a bigger kind of fated type of energy in the sense where, because Pluto represents the soul and Pluto represents fated events in our life, fated circumstances, fated life paths, fated connections we make with people. Some people don't like the word fate, and I can appreciate that, because the natural thinking or implication that comes up with that for people is that they have no power, no ability to decide. We always have the ability to decide. We always have a willpower to use And in the broader sense, that really is more about how we respond. We have a choice in how we react or respond to the circumstances that appear outside us externally, that will challenge us, and to the internal shifts that occur as well. You know, and a very powerful spiritual internal shift that can be triggered by Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto can cause a mental breakdown for somebody, or can be a complete, undeniable, beautiful process of ascension and spiritual awakening. So it's quite incredible how, you know, two extremes: mental breakdown, emotional breakdown, you know, quite severely, or transcend, ascend, you know, spiritually and expand your consciousness. So it can go either way, you know, and that will be very much determined from a point of view of the actual individual, right? So who the person is, where they're at in their life, what's going on in their life when they're having this transit. You know, a number of different factors will come into it. So the three outer planets, as I said, Uranus connects to deconditioning old behaviors. It also connects to the astral plane. It's a very eccentric energy. It connects to the right brain. It connects to our tribe, as in the larger community sort of tribe of people that we feel aligned with. It also connects to trauma, and it also connects to just, it's called, it's the awakener, because it awakens us to the future that we are heading towards, but it also awakens old things that live within us that we haven't actually resolved or let go or healed. So it awakens a number of different things within us that need to be addressed, that need to be worked with, that need to be understood, that need to be digested, that need to be processed. You know, so they're very demanding transits, the three outer planets, when we have them to these personal angles in the chart, 4 angles, ascendant, descendant, NCIC, or to any of the first 5 planets, personal planets. I just want to read you what Jeffrey Wolf Green says about the Uranus transit. He says, so if we go through a Uranus transit, guess what information is going to be released? All of it. The information pertaining to the past, the releasing of that which has been suppressed, and information pertaining to the larger future, which is what I just said more or less a minute ago. And then he says, why? Question mark. It all comes back to the original archetype called liberation. Freedom from the known, which is what Uranus is about. It's about liberation and freedom from the known. Freedom from the known just simply means freeing ourselves up from the conditions that have been accumulated over, could be lifetimes. But if you don't believe in reincarnation, then you can just apply that to the conditions and conditioning that has been a part of your life experience this lifetime. Before we can move into our future, we have to be free from our past to the extent that the past inhibits or blocks the future from being fully realized. To liberate in the sense of realizing how all the conditioning patterns have shaped and defined our reality, to liberate from that which has been suppressed. How many of you are going through this Uranus transit? Anyway, that's speaking to an audience. The way this book is written, there's an audience present. So when you go through a Uranus transit, all of these sources of information leak into your conscious awareness. And then he says, as this stuff appears into our consciousness, our awareness, it can feel very disjointed, disconnected, and the things that are happening in our reality can feel really, what's the connection with this and that? There can be a real sense of disjointed elements going on externally and internally. So this is just something for you guys to think about as well. He says that we can have 3 reactions to the Uranian impulse or through transit. So the first one is that people will suppress the energy, which is another way of saying, you know, that I'll do that next month, or I'll do that in 6 months' time. It's just that constantly putting it off, putting it off, putting it off. That's suppressing that Uranian impulse that's trying to come through, which is trying to liberate you. But don't forget, the natural inclination for humans is to hold on to what they have created or developed, even if it doesn't work, even if it makes them miserable. Some people more than others, because there are some signs that, you know, stay things longer than other signs. You know, fire signs operate differently, air signs operate differently, earth signs operate differently, water signs operate differently. So there's a, you know, layers that need to be considered when you are assessing this. So, as I said, number 1 is to suppress it. Number 2 is to totally go for it, and just throw everything off. He says it's the hermit in the tarot card. The second process of how one might respond to a Uranus transit is to just completely go for it. It's not a very typical response though, because most people don't like their comfort zone disrupted. You know, most people like that sense of stability and their comfort zone just being as it is. Because anything that comes to you when you're not ready for it and when you're not expecting it, it's a shock, it's disruption, it can be very distressing, it can be very uncomfortable, and some people resist that a lot more than others, as I explained a moment ago. Now with Neptune, you know, it's a similar thing, except Neptune represents different sort of experiences from the point of view of Neptune does a similar thing in the sense of Uranus, you know, deconditions, so it breaks structures in your life. And Neptune comes in and diffuses boundaries, which is a similar thing. It's just that the way Neptune does it, it's there's more of a softness, if you like, in the sense of it's not doesn't feel as much of a shock as it would with Uranus. Neptune can be so subtle, but it can creep up on you as well. Neptune connects to ultimate truth, you know, the divine, God, goddess, transcendence, disillusionment, mystics, you know, psychics, music, connects to a whole bunch of things. I'm not going to unpack the meaning of Neptune necessarily, but just some key words to kind of trigger our imagination when we're thinking about a Neptune transit. Neptune transits are all about surrender. We need to surrender to that energy. The natural predisposition is to want to hold on to our life circumstances, relationships, jobs, you know, whatever the case may be. But when Neptune comes in, there's first of all, there's a sense of feeling like things are just dissolving before your very eyes. You're trying to, you know, glue everything, as it were, together. You're trying to keep it all together, but Neptune is dissolving it all. It can be a very, very painful experience. This too can also lead to breakdowns as well, if we're not able to surrender and go with this energy. Now, Pluto is probably the most intense one, and I think the most profound, life-changing one, because a Pluto transit is more of it's a deep soul transformational experience. It's a sense of feeling, an inevitable sense of fate in your life that you absolutely cannot change it. It comes, and when it comes, it comes with full force. You know, Pluto represents soul. It's about death and rebirth. It's about transformation. It's the agent of transformation. Pluto can also make things reappear back in your life. So it can bring old lovers back into your life, whether they're from this life or even a previous life. So it brings things from the past that need further transformation. Pluto is about metamorphosis. It's the most intense energy, and it brings up the most powerful impulses on an obsessive level. Pluto also brings destruction. So very, very, very intense planetary energies, all three in very different ways. Now, if you have a transit from one of these three planets, the most typical experience is to have it basically impact your life for about 12 months, sometimes longer. The usual experience is that it has 3 hits. And what I mean by 3 hits is that, say, for example, that Pluto was about to conjunct your Mars or your Venus. So what will happen is, in its movement, it will conjunct your Mars, let's say. That'll be the first hit. Then it will possibly go retrograde. Then it will come back over that point again. Then it'll hit a second point, which will be about midway. If we think about 12 months starting from, keep it very simple, if it starts in January and ends in December, then you would have 1 hit in January, 1 hit maybe June, July, and then 1 hit maybe December, January. So it's kind of spread out like that. The volume of intensity is super, super big on those 3 impasses, you could say, those 3 passovers, which is the Pluto or Uranus or Neptune. It's the motion of that planet going forward and retrograde, direct and retrograde. That direct and retrograde motion that it does, forwards and backwards, is what defines the fact that you have 3 hits. Sometimes you'll have 5 hits. 5 hits is not that common, but sometimes it does happen, especially with Pluto. So you'll have a 3 passover with these planets, and the first point will be it can be a bit of a shock, a sense of shock of what's come up in your life at that time, which can be seen externally in your life through, in your external circumstances. And obviously that will pertain to whatever planet Pluto is making that conjunction to, whether it's Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, etc. And certainly if it is on one of the angles, and also where it is, if it's conjunct your Sun or conjunct Mercury, for example. And please include oppositions and squares to this same sort of principle, essentially. And so you're looking at Sun conjunct Mars, for example, in the 8th house, for instance, and then you need to bring in the understanding of what the 8th house means, okay? So there's a few layers to unpack, in other words, but essentially what you're looking at is an initial hitting point of the first conjunction, which can bring about, as I said, some kind of shock of what it's brought up in your life at that particular time. And there's no sense of understanding any of that. It's more of a shock of what's come up for you. It can be externally, it can also be an internal shift that's going on within you psychologically and spiritually as well. That's still, at that point in time, you can make no sense of it. But there's a strong feeling about it. There's a recognition, but there's no real understanding about it. The second point, when it makes its second hit, midway of that 12-month period, there's more of an awareness connected to what started when it had its first hit. There's more of there's more details in terms of knowledge about what's been going on, but there's still not enough understanding and meaning to what the hell's actually going on. So when it makes its final hit towards the end of that 12-month period, that's when the crystallization, you could say, or bigger picture sort of perspective kicks in, because your perspective has changed by this stage in terms of what's been happening in your life over the last 12 months. So that's how you can kind of very, very briefly put, that's how you can kind of break down a transit of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in terms of the 3 passes that it has over a 12-month period. Let's see what else I wanted to say. So in my own life, now this can be happening to you right now, any of you. Even though what I just discussed or explained to you was that a transit of one of those outer planets, which in terms of it having a 3-pass hit of the planet that it's aspecting while it's making its transit, so you experience that transit very briefly for 12 months in your life, at some stage in your life. That's just one transit, right? Which is incredibly powerful, especially if it's Pluto. And look, I mean, Uranus, Neptune as well, but more intensely Pluto, because Pluto doesn't act like a transit, it acts more like a progression. A progression is something that pertains more to deeper internal psychological processes, developmental stages, spiritual, psychic transformations, and so forth. Much deeper processes. Generally, transits pertain more to external events that can have profound change in our life. But it is frequently the case that external event is really just a reflection of some kind of internal process and change that's taking place on a deeper level anyway. So it's all connected. But Pluto just stirs things up from much deeper levels. And Pluto does connect to loss as well, you know, in the sense of something needs to die in order for this part of your life to be reborn again. Sometimes that can mean somebody leaving your life at that time as well. So it's not an easy experience. It's the most challenging transit you'll have is by Pluto. Pluto started impacting my life quite intensely in 2017. And it's from 2017, from that period and projecting into 16 years ahead for me in my life, Pluto is affecting the angles in my chart. It's aspecting my Mars, my Venus, my Saturn. It's aspecting itself. It's going to aspect the ascendant, descendant in my chart. Then it's going to hit the nodes in my chart. All these transits are taking place over a 16-year period with a couple of years gap of it not connecting to anything somewhere in that 16-year period. So what I'm looking at is a 16-year period of experiencing pretty significant Pluto transits in my life, and it all started from 2017. And from the moment it started, it totally turned my life upside down and totally changed my life forever. So anyway, that's what it's doing in my life, and I've got many more years of it to go. Now, the thing for me, Pluto in my natal chart pretty much aspects just about everything in my chart anyway. So the Pluto energy for me is something that I am very familiar with and resonate with very strongly. That doesn't mean it makes it easier. It just means that I can feel that energy very, very strongly operating in my life anyway. But certainly, and that may be you may have Pluto aspecting a lot of things in your own chart. Now, the implication of that is that when Pluto is aspecting a lot of things in your birth chart, it means that this life is not going to be a cushy life. You're not just going to kick back and have cocktails and, feel that this life is a walk in the park. You essentially are going to undergo the most profound transformations in your life this lifetime, because your soul is at a pretty important passageway of its evolution and is ready to undergo very profound transformations with its evolution. That's why Pluto is aspecting all these things in your birth chart. Now, if you don't have that, but let's just say that you do have a period where Pluto is going to be transiting a lot of points in your chart, a lot of things in your chart, such as what I just explained about my own life. For pretty much a 16-year period, I've got all these Pluto transits hitting off all sorts of things. That will be, a 15, 16-year period for me where I'm going to undergo this incredible metamorphosis, which started in 2017, and as I said, already changed my life forever anyway. So anyway, just wanted to share that with you, just so that you can have a little think about it. I know 16 years is projecting, quite a bit ahead, and it's not something I normally do. But from the point of view of when you have one planet, in terms of these outer planets, affecting your life for the next 10, 15 years, or even if it's 5 years, that's something that you need to pay attention to. That's a very profound process of metamorphosis and transformation that would be useful to pay attention to, so that you can begin to understand what is actually happening to you, what is happening in your life, because it's a long time. It's a long experience of undergoing incredibly profound changes in your life. So, the more we can have awareness about what's going on, the more we can potentially work with the energy so that we can get the most out of it. Otherwise, it'll just feel like we've been hit by a tsunami and we've just been taken under, and some may not resurface. It can be so intense, so powerful, so destructive, so incredibly life-changing, but equally so life-changing in the most beautiful, profound ways that transform you forever, in ways that your mind can't even imagine, because it's not a mental thing, it's a soul thing. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys today, and hopefully that is useful for you. So just to recap, it's about understanding the power of the 3 outer planets. And when you have a transit by one of these 3 outer planets, it usually lasts for about a year. But in certain cases, you can have the same planet hitting off a whole bunch of other things, where you can have this energy really intensified for quite a few years in your life. So have a look at that, or feel free to contact me for a reading, and maybe you can have some more understanding and more insight over what's going on for you with regards to these 3 outer planets, for instance, and how that's impacting and transforming and changing your life, or how it's making your life incredibly difficult, and how you might be able to work better with that energy and so forth. So I'll leave that there, guys. Thank you again so much for watching, and thanks for your comments and questions, and please continue to engage and leave your comments and questions below. I really appreciate all of them. Love hearing from all of you, And see you guys soon with another video. Love and blessings. Bye for now.